Hello and welcome to Tête-à-Tête, France 24's flagship interview show. Our guest today is Salam Fayyad. He is a former Palestinian prime minister and he joins us from Princeton University where he is a visiting senior scholar. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you, Mark, for having me on. Appreciate it.
We've reached now 100 days of war in Gaza. Israel signals that the most intensive phase of the war could now be over. Do you see any end in sight?
Unfortunately, there is not really much to go on by way of optimism that this war is coming to an end soon enough. I think it is very clear that most internationally have been wishing for this to come to an end for a while now. Some have been more vocal about the issue than others. Some are still kind of really trying to send signals in that direction. But the end result is that not enough is being done to really bring pressure to bear on the government, of Israel to bring this war to an end. It is a war to no end relative to the objectives stated by the government of Israel, going through the list of things they said they were out to accomplish, and they all range from the impossible to highly attainable, from full destruction of Hamas to doing this, that, and the other thing, and all that was clear was going to happen from the very beginning. Tens of thousands of Palestinians were going to perish as a result of this, and now we have about 100,000 dead and injured, not to mention the majority displaced, state of hunger, misery, destruction at an unprecedented scale. That's what we're looking at. So if some see that this is really dwindling, coming to an end, diminishing in intensity, I see nothing but a war of aggression continuing to rage on, unabated. And when it ends, it will not happen one day sooner than it should. That should have happened a long time ago. And I think it's time for this war to stop and for every effort to be made to really begin to deal with the devastating consequences, which are going to be with us for a very long period of time.
What about the U.S.? Is it doing enough to, as you say, stop this war?
You know, it was hoped from early on, actually, shortly after the war started, that the U.S. in its own way of dealing with Israel, some of the public statements that from time to time come out, that it was really beginning to signal a desire to see this war come to an end. But that has not really yielded much by way of action on the part of the government of Israel in that direction. So it's high time now, and given the highly privileged relationship between the United States and Israel, for the U.S. to be a lot clearer, and including publicly, on the need for this war to come to an end. I think that is absolutely urgent.
Do you fear that Israel's goal is actually to push Palestinians out of Gaza? Some Israeli ministers have called for this. Do you think that this is the actual goal, or do you think this is just a fantasy?
I am afraid that risk exists, not only in terms of what might end up happening by way of deportation. We know a lot of displacement has taken place. We know that tens of thousands have already left. This is a point of fact. Those who really could leave, given the fact that they are bearers of other passports and their dependents and things like that. But I am afraid, as a matter of fact, even after the war ends, depending on what happens afterwards, that the stage is set for a lot of Palestinians leaving. So I view this as a serious threat and serious risk going forward, regardless of how long this takes. Again, even if they were to stop tomorrow, or today even, with people having endured the kind of horror they have endured and continue to endure, is that bearable at all? For how much longer can it be considered bearable or felt bearable? I guess many who will find an opportunity to leave would leave. So there is absolutely that risk. All the more important for this war to stop. That's the underlying cause of all of this. And all the more reason for there to be every effort made on the part of ourselves, Palestinians, to assume full responsibility for taking care of the needs of our people in Gaza as fast as possible in order for that to lead to people beginning to feel better about the prospects for a better tomorrow. I think absent that, the risk of exodus and people leaving Gaza, not to mention the West Bank as well, I consider to be a serious and imminent risk for sure.
What about the day after? The U.S. says Gaza should be ruled by a quote-unquote revitalized Palestinian Authority. How do you see this unfolding?
Well, I actually should mention that I was first to call for a unitary Palestinian Authority to assume responsibility for the affairs of our people and to meet the needs of our people in Gaza, as in the West Bank, as should be the case. When the Palestinian Authority came into existence, it came into existence as an agent intended to provide for the welfare of Palestinian citizens living on the territory occupied by Israel in 1967, including Gaza. It was logical for that to be the answer to the needs of Gaza, not only in the so-called day after, but throughout. And we have Gaza now in state of separation from West Bank for 16 years or so, and I think it's about time for to restore things to the way they should be. So that was my own suggestion. At the time, I did not say revitalize, and this is all written. I said reconstituted and reconfigured. I argued early on, actually 2 weeks after October 7 or so, something like that, that for the PA as it existed then and continues to exist today, to assume responsibility for the affairs of our people in Gaza would be really too much to think as doable in its present form. It should be reconfigured or reconstituted, and what I meant by that, a political reconfiguration, reconstitution, in order for it to be politically enabled to deal with the needs of our people in Gaza. Now, subsequently, I'm actually pleased that the United States administration accepted the idea that a unitary PA should take care of the needs of people in Gaza and the West Bank. That's important. They said revitalized. I don't know exactly what they mean. They probably mean for the PA to be reformed in a technocratic sense, which I think is absolutely necessary, and I agree with that. But what I had in mind when I put forward that proposal was political enablement. That's the first step. It's necessary. And then we definitely would need to get, as Palestinians, together in order to actually bring about a better state of readiness, institutional capacity, in order for the Palestinian Authority to be able to effectively, responsibly, and responsively address the urgent needs of our people both in Gaza and the West Bank. So that's a good suggestion, and I think I'm all for it. It appears as though it is becoming a matter of international consensus, not only in the United States. European Union is in that space. Arab countries are in that space. I cannot understand for the life of me why is it that there has not been movement so far within our own polity to move forward with taking the steps necessary by expanding the PLO to include Hamas and Islamic Jihad in there, and to have the expanded PLO consent to a government that governs on its behalf, both in Gaza and West Bank. That takes time. Putting together a government could take weeks. Why not begin that process today? It seems to me taking time before that process of reconstitution begins is accepting a continuation of status quo, which essentially amounts to waiting until Bibi Netanyahu says, I'm done with this. And that definitely is not acceptable. Under any condition, should not be.
Do you blame President Abbas for not being more proactive on what you just described?
You know, I think it is really essential for all components of our political system to be proactive. Proactive is the right word. I think it's overdue for our polity to have moved in the direction that I have suggested. And it was not the first time for me to suggest that. It's been 10 years since I started writing about this in this way. So it is clear what needs to happen. It is clear that this would require readiness on the part of all components of our body politic. I think it's very important for the president, as a matter of fact, to take the first step of convening, as a matter of absolute and utter urgency, a meeting for all of the secretaries generals of the Palestinian factions, as has happened on numerous occasions, most recently in July of last year in Al Alamein in Egypt. And instead of really discussing open-endedly things here and there related to how we manage and how we do things, I think the single item of the agenda ought to be an immediate an unconditional expansion of the PLO to include all factions. You know, the PLO should not continue to insist that everybody should conform to its platform where they can join. For their part, factions like Hamas should not insist on the PLO changing its platform before they could join. Everybody is welcome around the table, as the case should be, because that is a form of pluralism. It should be actually endorsed. It should be adopted. The challenge for us Palestinians is to find a way to manage it effectively. That's well within what can be done. I think it's a matter of absolute urgency, particularly given the devastation that's taking place in Gaza, the daily killing, loss of life at a massive scale, unprecedented scale that's taking place, a new Nakba, if you will, and most certainly the imminent risk posed by question of people moving out in mass exodus out of Gaza.
Just as a quick conclusion, obviously your name has been bandied around as someone who could indeed take the helm of such a new structure. Have you been in touch with Egypt and the US about this? Are you being asked, and would you accept this?
The answer is no. I hear that conversation, but it's not a conversation that I have taken part in. I'm not a party to it. I actually made a public statement to that effect. I will not be a party to this kind of conversation with outside countries, authorities, or anything like that. As I said from the very beginning, this is a decision that needs to be taken nationally as a result and a product of national consensus on what needs to happen. It must be a product of national consensus, and it must be about managing the affairs and dealing with the needs of our people, both in Gaza and in the West Bank. Because to think about a framework for a transitional management of Gaza affairs, however temporary that may be, can only and would only reinforce the state of separation, which is a no-no-no. So first of all, this is a national decision. It should derive from national consensus. And I suggested a platform, actually, and a framework within that consensus can be forged. And that's what needs to happen. I hear the conversation, but it has been a conversation about me, but not with me. And I will not be a party to it.
Salam Fayyad, I want to thank you very much for appearing here on France 24, and I want to thank you all for watching this show. Thank you.